most of what goes on in sport goes on off the playing field.
It's about what you have on them in order to protect yourself.
I was first raped violently.
Well, you're finished. You'll never play football again.
Obviously, shoe contracts worth $400,000 or $500,000.
Morals and ethics don't exist above and beyond the society that they're a part of.
Nowadays, kids are faced with the choice of do you want a couple of $1 million or your college degree?
Sport is a metaphor for what goes on in the real world.
In the major sports franchises and in the major college programs in the United States, there seems to be a racial imbalance between the race of the players and the race of the coaches, managers, and owners. This racial imbalance calls out for an explanation. And even if a good explanation can be given, it raises the issue of what should be done to reduce any real discrimination or injustice in the management or ownership of sports. Opportunities in ownership and management are limited, and the reasons why some ownership bids are successful and why some coaching jobs are offered is often clouded in closed-door private negotiations among a close circle of decision makers who are predominantly white. The opportunity for exclusion, when taken together with the reality of the statistics which indicate that there are far lower numbers of minority coaches and owners than the population of minorities and minority athletes would suggest. Sports are public attractions and rely in many cases on public dollars for their continued support. So many believe that teams should reflect in their ownership and their management the racial balance of society. We discussed these issues at the Summit, the first international conference on ethics in sport. Let's revisit the Summit and consider these issues and the points of view expressed there.
Well, the problem is it's not much different from what goes on in the rest of society. If you look at the statistics about the who's in charge of corporate America, the top 95% of the positions are held by white males, and you only squeak in the 5% where you get white females and other minorities. Professional sports, it's the same thing. At the ownership level, it's very similar as well. There are 0 controlling owners that are African Americans at the top levels in sports. There are a few women and a couple of Asians, but no African Americans. Now, if you go down the next level, you have about 5% involved from positions of general manager up to president. But that's still a very small percentage when you think of the numbers that are actually on the field for African Americans. In basketball, for example, it's nearly 80%. In the NFL, it's 60%. Major League Baseball, it's 18% African American and about 19 or 20% Latino now. So that 5% of management doesn't look anything like the numbers that are on the field. I guess the basic response that you hear when you raise it was, well, it's going to take time. But last year, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of Jackie Robinson entering Major League Baseball. So it's been 50 years of time to make this happen, and it hasn't occurred. The ownership issue is a tougher one, and the moment for large numbers of African American ownership may be gone as we see more corporate ownership begin to take place, and there are not African American owned or controlled corporations that are the size of the Disneys and Rupert Murdoch's operations and all these other types of companies that are getting involved, Time Warner and the like. And it doesn't make, from a pure business analysis, financial sense for a wealthy individual, a Cosby or a Michael Jackson or an Oprah, to purchase a team, and not as a wise investment at this point in time.
Well, for me, the thing that drives me is the fact that we have matched the first half of Jackie Robinson's dream of changing the complexion of who plays our games, but we're so far from achieving the second half of his dream in terms of who runs our games, who coaches, who manages, who directs front offices, who owns teams. Unfortunately, it's still all people who pretty much look like me, and we are working very hard to create opportunities for women and people of color to move into that area by documenting how far we still have to go, by creating data banks for people at universities and in pro teams to call us if they want an African-American woman with an MBA in marketing who's had 7 years of licensing experience, so we can go to the professional association and generate some names of some people for you.
Well, ownership, historically, there are cases of individuals that wanted to own teams, and we've got to go to the 70s and 80s to find people that will say, yes, it was racism that kept me out. You had a group that was involved, Don Clendenin, the star baseball player with the Mets, that tried to purchase the Oakland A's, and he says that in the end it was racism that prevented their bid that was equal to all others from going through. You have Bruce Llewellyn, an African-American entrepreneur based in New York, who too in the 80s tried to purchase, I believe it was an NBA franchise, who says in the end it was racism, I believe, that kept me from getting the team. So, and is the case in recent years at least, it's difficult to find the Texaco tapes where someone's making the racist statements, or to have the Denny's type incident where there's direct evidence of this. But these are what some businessmen felt occurred to them at the time. Today you don't have, and this we're just talking about 10 years later, I haven't heard, and I've interviewed people extensively, the stories where someone said, this is why I'm not able to get it. That in fact you have most people in the know that say if African Americans came forward with the right numbers, they could purchase the team. But as I said earlier, it's largely corporate ownership that makes sense. That if you're a Disney, you can afford to lose some dollars on your baseball team or hockey team, but that may help promote your films or whatever else you have going on. So until there are African American enterprises like that, it's not going to make much sense to try to move forward there. So the racism is I don't think so prevalent today, but the negative impact came when there were possibilities and purchases weren't allowed.
It's working poorly. Everybody still looks like me, and unfortunately at the college level it's worse than the pro level. The pro level's had a lot of scrutiny for more than a decade. This is the first year that we included colleges and universities in the racial report card. And category by category, they were significantly worse than the worst of the pro sports, which is Major League Baseball. And the most disappointing of all was at the Division III level, where you might expect people would get a chance because winning isn't supposed to be so important. It's the most lily white of all the levels of NCAA sport.
If you look at the management level, so the next level down, there too, you have a large number of candidates. And in this case, I don't think there's any excuse for these candidates not to get the positions. You've had people that have had the lower level moving up the ranks type of jobs in sport-specific areas, but you also have people that are accountants, lawyers, could be team physicians and the like, that have desired positions and have not been able to obtain them. From the same standpoint, you don't have a lot of smoking gun evidence that someone said, I'm not hiring you because you're black or because you're a woman or whatever it might be. But if you look at the statistics, look at them around the major sports leagues, I think at present there's either one or no team physicians of all the nearly 100 professional sports franchises at the highest levels in the United States. You would think that there would be more African Americans involved at that level. There are a lot of African American doctors. But just based on statistics alone, you can't say that there is discrimination of the form that you could bring a lawsuit and force change to come about. So that's an important issue at that level.
Well, it's not just diversity and ownership. I mean, that's the ultimate, just like in social relationships, it's interracial marriage. There are steps in between that people who might not accept ownership at this stage or interracial marriage might be willing to be open to different kinds of experiences. And of course we should do it because this is what America is supposed to be about. And sports in particular is supposed to be the most equal playing field we have in this country. It is on the field, but off the field, once you get outside the lines, it's very different. It looks too much like everything else that goes on in society. But sports has the potential, as it does in the games themselves, to bring people together as equals, where we can shed some of the stereotypes, where we don't have to walk in and out of the boxes that we wake up every morning in and come back to bed at night in, and not think of ourselves and the people we meet as somebody who fits an image that we have conjured up over our lifetime, taught by parents, taught by schools, taught by the community, of what it means to be Jewish or black or white or Catholic or Latino or whatever it happens to be, that we can all have a lot more things in common than we thought, and even the things that are different can be building blocks for a stronger society beyond the playing field.
The clearest instance that people see on a day-to-day basis is you go down again to the head coaching position. And if you look across the various sports leagues, there's, I think in the NFL, if you go through the last 30 or so hires or interviews that have taken place, very rarely have we seen African Americans involved. In the NBA, as good as that league often looks, the number of African American head coaches hasn't increased much over the years, and at a point during this year we had a number of interim African American coaches, but I think only one or two that were fully entrenched in the positions. Major League Baseball has had the most problems over the years coming up with new numbers of African Americans. It's been 7 or 8 in the history of baseball, starting off with Frank Robinson. Just as recently as 1975, that's when baseball finally said we can have a black field manager in the game. So that sport has been the most problematic. And one of the things that's I guess revealing about baseball is if you look at the statistics in terms of what kind of experience these people have to have before they became managers, is it different for African Americans versus others? And the most revealing statistics, I think, is that for whites that have become managers in Major League Baseball, they've had on average 7 to 8 years of Major League playing experience. For African Americans, the average has been closer to 16 years. So you need twice the playing experience before you get the shot at the Major League managing job. So there are these kinds of differences that are there, but we're in a society today where people, everybody's not Jimmy the Greek, everybody's not Marge Schott. They're not the people that for the most part are making these decisions aren't mouthing off and saying they're racist. And in many instances, they're not. They're doing what many of us do in society. They are hiring, they are interviewing people that they've had relationships with, that they know from, if you think of Jerry Jones with Dallas, he hires guys as head coach that he went to school with, and certainly the time he went to school, particularly in Arkansas, it was largely a segregated setting. So many people are operating in complete good faith, but it's the nature of our society that the people that we know, the people that we have the most confidence in, people that we've had the longest relationships with are people that look like us.
The patterns of past sports management opportunities and decisions, together with the financial realities of the present, make ownership and race issues in sport come up against harsh economic realities. In many sports leagues, ownership is beyond the financial capability of almost all individuals and is the province of corporations. Management and coaching, on the other hand, are not limited by available capital.
Professor Ken Shropshire, author of Black and White, Race and Sport in America, and acting director of the African American Studies program at the University of Pennsylvania, notes that the racial percentages of sports ownership and management is similar to the percentages in corporate America. He attributes lack of recent movement in increased black ownership of professional sports franchises to the economic fact that today it is difficult for individuals of any race to purchase a team. But the recent economic realities build in past discrimination. As a lawyer, he points out that it is difficult to prove individual cases of discrimination in sports without specific hard evidence. And in the case of sports management, rather than ownership, employment still reflects significant discrimination against African Americans. It is a fact African Americans require twice the time in the league to achieve their positions, even when they are appointed. Dr. Richard Lapchick, recipient of many prestigious international humanitarian awards, founder and director of Northeastern University's Center for the Study of Sport and Society, and noted author, points out that we have not achieved the second half of Jackie Robinson's dream: equal opportunity to own, operate, and manage the games. Not enough attention is focused on the fact that colleges are worse than the professional teams in their hiring of African Americans as coaches and managers of teams. Sports on the field is supposed to be equal, but off the field sports still looks like the rest of American society, racially unequal.
The free exchange of capital and talent in the marketplace is said to permit the best outcomes for both buyers and sellers. To what extent is there an open sports market for minority coaching and management talent? To what extent are sports management opportunities limited by race? What are the steps that the best teams would take to achieve justice among ownership, management, and players?
Well, it's a difficult multi-step process. Certainly the biggest change can come just the hearts and minds kind of change on the part of the owners that make these hiring decisions. There have been some, I guess, synthetic mechanisms put in place to try to create networks where the people that are of goodwill and have no intent to discriminate and would broaden their hiring base if they knew others. One of these types of programs is the, I think the program's called the Excellence in Coaching Clinic. Bill Walsh started it, and the concept was to bring together the top minority coaches with management, give them a setting in which they can get to know each other, and let's see some hires can come out of this. And a number of hires did come out of that, and that program's been ongoing. So particularly at the assistant level, but even at the head coaching level, there may be a role for some lawsuits where in fact there are violations that are blatant. It's a difficult area. As a lawyer, you look at this, it's difficult to find a plaintiff in a case like this to say there was this kind of discrimination that took place. And the difficulty comes because that person is largely going to be ending their career by bringing that kind of lawsuit, a long, drawn-out kind of process.
Well, if diversity gets to the issue of race, it is obviously play a big role because you're in the selection process of either the coach or the player, and you're finally going to make those decisions. You're going to be the final arbitrator of that decision. I would just say that in our case, we hired a minority coach, one of the few that have in this league, but we didn't do it in order to hire a minority coach. I always say that Tony deserves more credit than that. He was hired because he was the most qualified guy and the best candidate. He was not hired because he was a black assistant coach that we were seeking to promote. I think that in our game, it's unquestioned where we've come as far as minorities and the role they play in our game. And I think we must take that into account. I think as time goes on, that is a problem I am convinced will solve itself as far as representation at the head coach level. I think one of the problems we have today in the game is the way coaches are selected is very happenstance and not an exact science. It's done under media scrutiny. It's done under timetables that should not be set. It's not done in a professional manner a lot of times because the owner feels a lot of pressures to do certain things that ultimately cause that decision to be one of, well, let me get somebody everybody knows, or let me get somebody that's actually coached in the game so we can sell some tickets, as opposed to who's the most qualified guy. I think over time, though, that will be a problem that truly does solve itself.
As you know, I was involved in trying to get a Major League Baseball team here. Probably the most devastating time was when we weren't selected to have a baseball team. I didn't see how that wasn't possible. I had never in my wildest dreams that I think after all the years and all the money and all the effort, I would tell you even today I very rarely read a sports page, and that was 1990 when that happened. That was even though I've had other. Yeah, that was a tremendous. I can't describe the disappointment and what a devastating. Because I'm an up person, I don't get down very often on myself or on anything. The glass is always half full; it's never half empty. But that was a very, very big disappointment to me, and that was a tough thing to get over. I mean, I'm talking about it was a couple of years before I got myself mentally squared away. That was a very difficult period in my life.
I just have one last little point I want to make, and it's part of that Jerry Maguire scene where you see a black agent, a black athlete represented by a white agent. which I wanted to ask Ray, because he's kind of been at the forefront of this, is that you hear, and I've heard, that white agents will play the race card with black athletes by saying you don't want to be represented by a black athlete by a black agent because they can't get you the kind of dollars that I can get you. They don't have the experience, they don't have the respect, they don't have the relationships. I remember Len Elmore when he signed Joe Smith for the first time, because he had competed very successfully against David Falk. It was a momentous moment for Len Elmore as well as it was for Joe Smith, because he felt he could play in that league now that David Falk was in. But I'm interested as to how the ethics of a black agent having to deal with white agents. Have you heard that time and time again from people?
I've heard it. I've personally experienced it. That's just this is a panel on ethics, so that fits right in.
I mean, how ethical is it to
well, it's not ethical, but it happens. And over the years, I think it happens less and less, first of all, because I think our community, the African American community in particular, is much more aware of the abuses, and now we're much more sophisticated and knowledgeable about the facts as opposed to the non-facts. So there's more education whereby if you've established yourself and you've had some success, the white agent who will come in and try to run that on a parent is less likely to be successful. And frankly, the folks now that you are trying to solicit or recruit as clients, their parents are my age. You know, I got parents younger than me now, so they've gone through similar experiences and understand that they'll run that game on you if you allow them. So it happens less frequently to us now. But I've had one of the top agents say very specifically to a player that had come down and realized that, you know, Ray Anderson, AR Sports, is in the final two. It's me and him. Pulled out that card and played it effectively.
The cards that are played, whether it's against the white agent or against the black agent, depending on who's playing the card, all the cards that are played in this business, with respect, that are brutal. When you come down to the final arena, the final two, and I know just what you're talking about, by the way, and what a hill of stuff that is.
Justice in modern society is not a universally agreed upon concept regarding hiring and promotion. To what extent are sports hiring decisions essentially private decisions and the privilege of ownership? And to what extent are they public decisions, deserving the protections and the voice of the public in the choices made?
Professor Ken Shropshire argues that changes must come in the hearts and minds of the owners and managers who make hiring decisions. And he cites Bill Walsh's Excellence in Coaching Clinic as one step toward creating comfort among owners and minority coaches. He notes that from a legal enforcement point of view, discrimination in this area is very difficult to prove. Rich McKay, general manager for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers football team, notes that the Buccaneers did not hire a minority coach, but hired the best candidate who happened to be a minority. He believes that in many coaching decisions, that many outside factors influence the choice made, and that in many instances, the hiring of a head coach is not done in a professional manner. Frank Morsani, a participant in several major franchise purchase deals, sought to bring a baseball team to Tampa, but was denied. He was promised a team for his efforts by those in power. He did many costly favors for them when asked, and he was ultimately passed over in the selection process for the new team by Major League Baseball. It is important to note that not all injustice in ownership and franchise selection is based on race. Armin Katayan, two-time Emmy Award-winning sports writer, CBS and HBO sports correspondent, asked the questions: do athletes consider race when hiring agents? Do agents use the race card to recruit athletes? Ray Anderson is a successful practicing sports attorney representing clients in baseball, football, and the NCAA. A member of the board of the Sports Lawyers Association and the Black Sports Agents Association. responds to Armin's questions when he says that several agents use the race card and that using the race issue cuts different ways, creating different types of harm and injustice. Tom Reich, prominent sports attorney for over 27 years, represents many high-profile athletes, notes that the use of the race card in sports agent hiring is characteristic of the highly competitive world of sports business.
Justice in sports management and sports ownership is a basic and fundamental ethical issue in sports and society. The glass ceiling for women, minority employment and admissions in business and college, justice in pay, hiring, admissions, and promotions are still in question outside of sports. So the existence of these ethical issues within sports should be no surprise. But given the demands for public dollars by privately held sports organizations and public and corporate support for sports, it does not seem too much to ask that sports organizations strive to respect and work with all aspects of the society in which they are a part and from which they ask our continued loyalty and financial support.